I stood at the doorway, watching her leave, tall, confident, and wrapped in a dress that said far more than it should. Her heels clicked against the pavement with a rhythm that felt almost defiant, as if they were announcing her resolve to the world. I didn't say a word, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because every word I tried to muster had already been crushed under the weight of her last glance. That cold, self-assured look, the kind that made you feel like you were nothing more than a footnote in her story. This wasn't just any evening. It started a few days ago when she first mentioned the party. "I'm going to that party at Melissa's place this Friday," she said casually over dinner, as if announcing a routine grocery run. I looked up from my plate, caught off guard. Melissa? Isn't she the one who threw that wild party last year? The one with the cops and everything? Danielle shrugged, swirling her wine. "It's not going to be like that this time. It's just a small gathering. Nothing crazy." My gut told me otherwise. Melissa was trouble, and her so-called gatherings were notorious for spinning out of control. I set down my fork, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not sure it's a good idea, Danielle. You know how those parties can get. It's not exactly the best environment, is it?" Her eyes narrowed, and I knew I'd stepped on a landmine. "Ethan, I'm an adult. I don't need permission to go to a party." "It's not about permission," I countered. "It's about respect. You know how I feel about these things." She leaned back in her chair, smirking. "You mean how you feel about me having any fun?" The conversation spiraled from there. No matter how I tried to explain my concerns, she twisted my words into something else entirely. By the end of it, I felt like the bad guy for even bringing it up. And now, here I was, watching her disappear into the night, dressed for attention and heading to a party I wanted no part of. I spent the evening trying to distract myself, but it was no use. Every time I glanced at my phone, a small part of me hoped for a message from her. Some sign that she was thinking about me, that she cared about how I felt. Instead, the silence was deafening. Hours passed, and I eventually gave up trying to pretend everything was fine. I went to bed alone, staring at the empty side of the bed, wondering what exactly had gone so wrong between us. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, there was a knock at the door. I groggily stumbled out of bed, still half asleep, and opened it. There she was, standing on the porch. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and her dress, well, let's just say it told a story all on its own. "Danielle?" I muttered, the confusion and anger already bubbling to the surface. What the hell happened? She didn't say a word. She just stood there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. And that's when I saw it. The faint trace of guilt flickering behind her eyes, like a shadow she couldn't quite hide. I knew, in that moment, that everything was about to change, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I stood there in the doorway, staring at Danielle. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said, and it rattled me. She wasn't the type to shy away from confrontation. If anything, she thrived on it. But now, she looked like someone who'd been caught in a storm she wasn't prepared for. "Danielle," I repeated, my voice firmer this time. "What happened?" She sighed heavily and glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear behind her. When she finally turned back to me, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes darted around, never quite meeting mine. "I don't want to do this right now, Ethan," she muttered. I stepped aside, motioning her to come in. "Oh, we're doing this. You show up at my door like this, and you think I'm just going to let it go? Not a chance. Start talking." She hesitated, but finally walked inside. The click of her heels echoed in the silence of the house, a sound that felt out of place in the quiet morning. She stopped in the living room and turned to face me, arms crossed defensively. "I stayed at Melissa's," she said flatly. "I had too much to drink, so I didn't come home. End of story." I tilted my head, studying her carefully. The defensive tone, the way she avoided eye contact, it all screamed lie. And if there was one thing I couldn't stand, it was being lied to. "That's the story you're sticking with?" I asked, My arms crossed now, mirroring her stance. What's that supposed to mean? She snapped. It means I'm not buying it, Danielle. You look like you've been through a war zone, and your story doesn't add up. What really happened? Her eyes flared with anger. You're unbelievable, Ethan. I just told you I stayed at Melissa's, and now you're accusing me of, what, exactly? Cheating? Is that what you think? The word hung in the air like a dagger between us. I didn't respond immediately, but my silence was enough to confirm her suspicions. Unreal, she said, shaking her head and letting out a bitter laugh. You're always so quick to assume the worst about me. Do you even hear yourself? I hear myself just fine, I shot back. The question is, do you hear yourself? Because from where I'm standing, you're doing a terrible job of convincing me. Her face flushed with frustration, and she threw her hands up. Fine, Ethan. Believe whatever you want. Clearly, nothing I say is going to change your mind. She turned to leave, but I wasn't about to let her walk away from this. Not without answers. Danielle, I said sharply, and she froze mid-step. If you don't tell me the truth now, I'll find out one way or another. So save us both the trouble and just be honest. She turned back to me slowly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of vulnerability, something raw and unguarded. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the same defiance she'd worn like armor all night. You want the truth? She said, her voice cold. Fine, I'll give you the truth. I went to that party because I needed to get away from you, Ethan. From your constant nagging, your insecurity, your need to control every little thing I do. I needed a break, okay? Her words hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off. And yes, I drank too much. And yes, I stayed out all night. But you know what? I don't owe you an explanation for everything I do. You're not my warden. I stared at her, struggling to process what I just heard. My stomach churned with a mix of anger, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite place. This isn't about control, Danielle, I said, my voice quiet but steady. This is about respect. Respect for our marriage, for each other. But I guess that doesn't mean much to you anymore, does it? She flinched slightly, as if my words had struck a nerve, but she quickly recovered, her face hardening again. I'm done with this conversation, she said, brushing past me toward the stairs. I'm going to shower and sleep. Do whatever you want, Ethan, but don't expect me to apologize for living my life. I stood there, rooted in place, as I watched her disappear up the stairs. My fists clenched at my sides, and my mind raced with 1,000 questions. But one thought stood out above the rest, clear and unrelenting. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't going to let this go until I uncovered the truth. I stood in the living room for what felt like an eternity after Danielle stormed up the stairs. My mind was spinning, replaying every word she said, every flicker of emotion on her face. Her excuses were flimsy, her defensiveness too sharp to be natural. She wasn't just hiding something. She was practically begging me to dig deeper. But where did I even start? I grabbed my phone and sat down on the couch, scrolling through her social media profiles. Nothing unusual there. A few selfies from earlier in the week, some random memes, and a post about enjoying life to the fullest from a few days ago. The usual fluff she loved to share to keep up appearances. But there was nothing about the party. Not a single photo, comment, or check-in. Strange, considering Danielle loved to document every aspect of her life. Frustrated, I set the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My gut was screaming at me that there was more to this, but I needed proof. Something solid, something undeniable. Then it hit me. Melissa. I grabbed my phone again and opened her contact. Melissa and I were hardly friends, but we'd exchanged numbers once during a couple's dinner a few months ago. I debated for a moment, then typed out a quick text. Hey Melissa, just checking in. Did Danielle stay with you last night? She said she did, but she seemed upset this morning. Just want to make sure everything's okay. I stared at the message before hitting send, my finger hovering over the button. If Danielle found out I was checking up on her, she'd lose it. But at this point, I didn't care. I needed answers. The message went through, and I sat there, waiting for what felt like forever. Minutes ticked by with no response, and my anxiety grew with each passing second. Finally, the phone buzzed. Melissa's reply was short and to the point. She wasn't with me. Haven't seen her since last week. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I reread the message, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there it was in black and white. Danielle had lied. A wave of emotions washed over me. Anger, betrayal, confusion. I wanted to march upstairs and confront her, to demand she tell me where she really was. But a voice in the back of my mind stopped me. If she'd lied so easily about something like this, there was no guarantee she'd come clean now. I needed more. I decided to dig further. I opened her phone bill, something I'd never done before but now felt justified in doing. Scrolling through the recent calls and texts, one number stood out, a number I didn't recognize, but it appeared over and over again, especially late at night. My heart pounded as I copied it down and searched it online. The results led me to a name, Brandon. My throat tightened. Brandon wasn't a coworker, family member, or anyone I'd ever heard Danielle mention. So who the hell was he? I debated calling the number, but something told me to wait. Instead, I decided to check her location history. Danielle wasn't the most tech-savvy person, and I'd set up location tracking on her phone years ago when she kept getting lost on road trips. She never bothered to turn it off, and now it was about to be my key to the truth. I opened the app, my hands clammy as I scrolled through her recent locations. Sure enough, last night's trail didn't lead to Melissa's house. It led to a hotel on the other side of town. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. A hotel? She'd spent the night at a hotel? The implications were glaringly obvious, but I still clung to a shred of hope that there was some other explanation, some way to make sense of this without going down the road I dreaded. Just then, I heard the water shut off upstairs. My stomach churned as I imagined her stepping out of the shower, completely unaware that her web of lies was unraveling beneath her. I couldn't sit still anymore. I stood up and began pacing, my mind racing with questions. Who was Brandon? Why was she at a hotel? What the hell was she hiding? When Danielle finally came downstairs, wrapped in a robe with her damp hair tied up, she looked at me with mild annoyance. Still sulking? She asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I clenched my fists, fighting back the urge to confront her right then and there. Where were you last night, Danielle? I asked, my voice calm but firm. She rolled her eyes. I already told you. I was at Melissa's. Can we move on from this, please? I held up my phone, showing her the text from Melissa. Her eyes flicked to the screen, and for the first time, I saw real panic flash across her face. It was brief, just a split second, but it was enough. Melissa said you weren't there, I said, my voice growing colder. So I'll ask you again. Where were you? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she stared at me, her face a mix of shock and indignation, as if she couldn't believe I'd caught her. I'm waiting, I said, my patience wearing thin. Finally, she scoffed and crossed her arms, her expression hardening. You're unbelievable, Ethan. Spying on me? Checking up on me like some paranoid control freak? Do you even hear yourself? Don't turn this around on me, I snapped. You lied, Danielle. You weren't at Melissa's. So tell me the truth or I swear, I'll find it out myself. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she hesitated. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. And in that moment, I realized something. Whatever she was about to say, it wasn't going to be the truth. Danielle stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right lie to tell. I could see the wheels turning in her head, her desperation to salvage control over the situation. But the silence between us was deafening, and I wasn't about to let her slip away from this. Fine, she finally said, her voice sharp. I didn't stay at Melissa's. I went to the party and drank too much. One of Melissa's friends drove me to the hotel so I could sleep it off. Are you happy now? I stared at her, my fists clenching at my sides. Do you think I'm stupid? I asked, my voice low but cutting. If it was just a ride to sleep off some drinks, why didn't you tell me that from the start? Why lie about staying at Melissa's? Danielle glared at me, her defiance returning. Because I knew you'd react like this. You always blow things out of proportion, Ethan. I didn't want to deal with your accusations and paranoia. My blood boiled. Accusations? Paranoia? Danielle, I have every reason to question you right now. You've done nothing but lie since the moment you walked back in this door. She rolled her eyes, her posture rigid. I don't owe you an explanation for every little thing I do. Maybe if you weren't so controlling, I wouldn't feel the need to keep things from you. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. This isn't about control, Danielle. This is about trust, and you've completely shattered it. So, let me ask you again. What were you really doing at that hotel? Her eyes flickered for a moment, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not anger, not annoyance, fear. She stepped back, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. You know what? She said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't have to stand here and take this. Believe whatever you want, Ethan. I'm done explaining myself to you. She turned to walk away, but I wasn't finished. Danielle, I said sharply, stopping her in her tracks. If you walk away from this conversation, I'll take that as confirmation. You're hiding something, and I will find out what it is. She froze, her back to me. For a moment, I thought she might actually turn around and come clean, but instead, she let out a bitter laugh and kept walking, disappearing up the stairs. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. Her lies, her deflection, her refusal to answer my questions. It all pointed to one conclusion. She was hiding something, and it wasn't innocent. I didn't know what my next move was, but one thing was certain. I couldn't just let this go. The cracks in our marriage were no longer just cracks. They were gaping wounds, and I was determined to find the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The silence in the house was unbearable. I sat on the edge of the couch, my head in my hands, replaying every moment from the past 24 hours. Danielle's lies weren't just careless. They were deliberate. The fear I saw in her eyes before she stormed upstairs told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just hiding the truth. She was terrified of it coming out, but I wasn't about to let it slide. Not this time. I grabbed my phone and went back to the unfamiliar number that kept appearing on her call log. Brandon. Whoever this guy was, he held the answers Danielle refused to give me. My hands trembled as I typed out a message. Hi, this is Ethan. I'm Danielle's husband. I need to talk to you about something important. It felt risky, almost reckless, but I couldn't sit idle anymore. I hit send, then waited, staring at the screen as my stomach churned. Minutes passed, then a notification popped up. Brandon, hey man, I don't think I'm the right person for this conversation. That single sentence hit like a gut punch. He didn't deny knowing Danielle. He didn't even bother pretending he was someone else. His response felt loaded, like he was admitting guilt without outright saying it. I called the number. My heart pounded in my chest as the line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, to my surprise, it clicked. Ethan, a deep voice said, calm, collected, almost smug. Brandon, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I think you know why I'm calling. There was a pause, and then he sighed. Look, man, this is between you and Danielle. I don't want to get involved. Involved? I snapped. You already are involved. I don't know who you think you're fooling, but I'm not an idiot. So why don't you save us both some time and just tell me the truth? He chuckled softly, the sound grating against my nerves. The truth, huh? Trust me, Ethan, you don't want to hear it. Try me, I said through gritted teeth. There was another pause, longer this time, and I could hear him debating whether to say more. Finally, he spoke. All right, fine. Danielle and I have been seeing each other. She told me things between you two were over, that you were just roommates at this point. So, yeah, we spent the night together at the hotel. Is that what you wanted to hear? My breath caught in my throat. Hearing it confirmed out loud. Even though I'd suspected it, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My grip on the phone tightened as I tried to process his words. "You're lying," I said weakly, even though I knew he wasn't. "Believe what you want," Brandon said casually. "But if I were you, I'd have a serious talk with Danielle. And maybe take a look in the mirror while you're at it." The line went dead. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, as the weight of his words sank in. She hadn't just lied about the party, or about staying at Melissa's. She'd been with him, this Brandon, and she'd made me out to be some pathetic, irrelevant figure in her life. My hands shook as I put the phone down. My mind raced, filled with anger, betrayal, and a deep, gnawing sense of humiliation. How long had this been going on? How many lies had she told to cover her tracks? I stood up, pacing the room as my emotions boiled over. I wanted to march upstairs and demand answers. I wanted to shout, scream, make her feel even a fraction of the pain she just put me through. But instead, I stopped. I realized something. Confronting her now wouldn't change anything. She'd deny, deflect, twist the narrative to make me the villain. That's who Danielle was. And I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. No, if she wanted to play games, I'd play along, but on my terms. I sat back down, opening her location history again. If this had been going on for a while, there had to be more. More visits to that hotel, more places she thought I wouldn't notice. I needed proof, real proof, before I made my next move. And this time, I wouldn't be blindsided. The truth was coming out, one way or another. I spent the next hour scouring her location history. Every pin, every timestamp, every unexplained detour. It all began to paint a picture I wasn't prepared to see. Over the past month, Danielle had visited that same hotel 3 times. Always late at night, always staying for hours, and always erasing any trace of it from her conversations with me. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a bad decision made in the heat of the moment. This was deliberate, planned, and worst of all, she thought she'd gotten away with it. But I wasn't just going to stop with location data. If she'd been careless enough to leave that trail, there had to be more she didn't bother hiding. I grabbed her laptop from the desk in the corner of the living room. We shared it, but she rarely used it, at least, not when I was around. I opened her email first, scanning through months of mundane messages. Work updates, shopping confirmations, the usual junk. But then, in the sent folder, I saw something that made my stomach twist. An email from 3 weeks ago, sent to someone named Brandon. Subject, looking forward to Friday message. I'll tell Ethan I'm at Melissa's again. Same room as last time? I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my vision tunneled. It wasn't just an affair. It was a routine. A lie so practiced that she had a script for it. I leaned back in the chair, my head pounding. My mind raced with images of her laughing with him, lying to my face, walking out the door knowing full well what she was about to do. I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed air, space, something to stop the walls from closing in. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the front door, leaving it ajar behind me. The morning air was crisp, biting at my skin, but it wasn't enough to shake the storm raging inside me. As I walked aimlessly down the block, I thought about all the times I'd defended her. To my friends, my family, even to myself. How many times had I brushed off her selfishness, chalked up her actions to a bad day, or just how she is? And for what? For her to turn around and make me the fool? I stopped at the corner, leaning against a lamppost as my thoughts spiraled. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I needed an outside perspective, someone to talk me down, or talk me through whatever was coming next. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person I knew would listen. My sister, Grace. She'd always been my rock, the one person who'd never sugar-coated anything, even when I didn't want to hear it. "Ethan," she answered after the second ring, her voice groggy. "Grace, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice cracking. "What's going on? Are you okay?" "No," I admitted, the word tumbling out before I could stop it. "I'm not. It's Danielle. She's cheating on me, Grace." The line went quiet for a moment, and then her voice softened. "Ethan, Where are you? Are you at home? I'm outside, I said, glancing back toward the house. I couldn't stay in there. Not after what I just found out. Okay, she said firmly. I'm coming over. Just stay put. All right? Don't do anything until I get there. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thanks, Grace. When I hung up, I felt a small flicker of relief. At least I wouldn't have to face this alone. But as I made my way back to the house, that relief was quickly replaced by dread. Danielle was still upstairs, probably thinking she'd managed to deflect me again. But her lies were unraveling faster than she could spin them. I stepped back into the house, shutting the door quietly behind me. The laptop was still on the desk, the incriminating email staring back at me like a cruel reminder of what I'd just uncovered. I had a decision to make. Confront her now, without all the pieces, or wait until I had undeniable proof. Proof that no amount of manipulation or excuses could erase. For now, I chose the latter. The truth was on my side, and I was determined to use it against her. By the time Grace arrived, I felt like a volcano ready to erupt. I'd paced the living room for what felt like hours, staring at the email on Danielle's laptop and replaying Brandon's smug voice in my head. When Grace knocked on the door, I practically yanked it open. She took one look at me and frowned. "You look like hell," she said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind her. "Thanks," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Grace sat on the couch and gestured for me to do the same. "All right, spill. What happened?" I sat down, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Danielle lied about where she was last night. She told me she was at Melissa's, but she wasn't. She was with someone else, some guy named Brandon. Grace's expression darkened. "And how do you know this?" I walked her through everything. The location history, the phone records, the email I'd found. I even told her about the phone call with Brandon, his casual admission of the affair, and Danielle's deflection when I tried to confront her. By the time I finished, Grace looked livid. "Unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "I always knew Danielle was selfish, but this is on another level. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to confront her right now, but another part of me thinks I need more proof. Something she can't worm her way out of." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "You're right to be cautious. She's already lied to your face. If you don't have something solid, she'll just twist the narrative to make you the bad guy." "I know," I said, my voice heavy, "but it's eating me alive, Grace. I can't keep pretending everything's fine." She reached over and placed a hand on my arm. "You don't have to pretend, but you do have to be smart about this. Take your time, gather everything you need, and when you're ready, hit her with the truth so hard she can't deny it." I nodded, her words sinking in. She was right. This wasn't just about catching Danielle in a lie. It was about taking control of the situation. "Do you have any idea how long this has been going on?" Grace asked. I shook my head. "No, but if I had to guess, it's been at least a few months. Maybe longer." Grace sighed, leaning back against the couch. "You don't deserve this, Ethan. No one does. But you need to start thinking about your next steps. What do you want to do if, no, when you have the proof?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't even thought that far ahead. Divorce? Separation? Could I even handle the fallout of tearing our lives apart? "I don't know," I said finally. "All I know is I can't keep living like this. Something has to change." Grace nodded, her expression softening. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here for you. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't let her manipulate you into staying if this is really over. You deserve better, Ethan. Don't let her convince you otherwise." I nodded, her words giving me a small measure of strength. As we sat there in silence, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Danielle appeared in the doorway, her hair still damp and her expression cold. She froze when she saw Grace sitting on the couch. "What's going on here?" Danielle asked, her tone sharp. Grace looked at me, then back at Danielle. "Just catching up with my brother." "Something wrong with that?" Danielle's eyes narrowed. "No, it just seems odd." Her gaze flicked to the laptop on the desk, and I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew. She knew I'd been digging, and the realization sent a wave of tension through the room. "I'm going out," Danielle said abruptly, grabbing her purse from the counter. "Where?" I asked, standing up. She hesitated, her hand tightening around the strap of her purse. "I don't need to report my every move to you, Ethan." With that, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me and Grace in a stunned silence. "She's panicking," Grace said finally. "Whatever she's hiding, it's bigger than you think. Be ready for it." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Whatever Danielle was planning, she wasn't going to get away with it. Not this time. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Danielle was running, but I wasn't going to let her escape this time. Whatever she was hiding, it was coming to light, one way or another. Grace stood and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ethan, she's scared. That means you're close to the truth. Don't back down now." I nodded, determination coursing through me. "I'm done playing her games. It's time to get the full picture." Grace grabbed her coat. "Let me know if you need me. But whatever you do, stay calm. You're in control now, Ethan, not her." Once she left, I sat at the desk, staring at Danielle's laptop. Her email to Brandon was damning enough, but I wanted more. If she had been careless enough to leave one thread loose, there were bound to be others. I opened her browser history, my hands trembling slightly as I clicked through the tabs. And there it was, a confirmation email from the hotel she'd visited, with multiple bookings over the past 3 months. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the dates. They lined up perfectly with the nights she'd claimed to be at Melissa's. This wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown affair, carefully orchestrated and hidden behind a facade of normalcy. Then I saw something else. An online purchase receipt for an expensive gold bracelet. The buyer? Danielle. The shipping address? Not ours. My stomach twisted as I copied the address and searched it online. It was an apartment across town. Whose apartment? My hands moved on autopilot, pulling up more records, tracing more breadcrumbs. I found another email exchange between Danielle and Brandon. This one stung more than the last. Subject, our next step message. I told him I'm going to visit my sister next weekend. We'll have the place to ourselves. Can't wait to see you. It wasn't just the affair. She was actively making plans to keep this charade going, stringing me along while she built a second life behind my back. My anger boiled over, but I forced myself to stay composed. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my next move. Danielle returned home a couple of hours later, her expression guarded. She walked into the living room, saw me at the desk, and froze. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and faced her, holding her laptop in my hands. "Where were you, Danielle?" Her eyes narrowed. "I told you, I don't need to justify every move I make." I stepped closer, my voice calm but firm. "You don't need to justify anything, but you do need to explain this." I turned the laptop around, showing her the email thread with Brandon. Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she looked genuinely terrified. But then, as if flipping a switch, she crossed her arms and scowled. "You went through my private emails? How dare you?" "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped. "You lied, Danielle. Repeatedly. About where you've been, about who you've been with. And now I have proof." She scoffed, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. "You're so paranoid, Ethan. This is why I didn't tell you. Because you blow everything out of proportion." "Blow what out of proportion?" I demanded. "The fact that you've been sneaking off to hotels with Brandon? That you've been lying to me for months? Or that you've been planning your next getaway while I sit here like an idiot, trusting you?" Danielle's mask of defiance slipped for a moment, and I saw something I hadn't expected, guilt. But it was fleeting. She straightened up, her voice icy. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing Brandon. But can you blame me, Ethan? Look at you. You're boring. Predictable. You suffocate me with your routines and your need to control everything." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, but I didn't let them show. So, this is my fault? You cheated because I didn't entertain you enough? She shrugged, her indifference cutting deeper than any insult. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have needed someone else. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. You're unbelievable, Danielle. Do you even hear yourself? You've destroyed our marriage, and instead of taking responsibility, you're blaming me? I'm not doing this with you, she said, turning to leave. Don't you dare walk away, I said sharply. You think you can just run every time you're cornered? Not this time. We're talking about this now. She stopped, her shoulders stiffening. Slowly, she turned back to me, her face a mix of anger and resignation. Fine. You want to talk? Let's talk. But you're not going to like what I have to say. I crossed my arms, bracing myself for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. Try me. Her next words sent a chill down my spine. This marriage has been over for a long time, Ethan. I've just been waiting for the right moment to move on. And guess what? That moment is now. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Everything I'd fought to protect, everything I thought we had, was gone. And the worst part? She didn't even care. But as I stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, one thing became clear. This wasn't the end for me. It was the end for her. And I was going to make sure of it. Danielle's words hung in the air, venomous and final. This marriage has been over for a long time. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the weight of her betrayal sink in. But then, something inside me shifted. The pain and confusion that had consumed me over the past few days began to transform into something else. Clarity. She wanted out? Fine. But she wasn't going to walk away unscathed. I straightened up, my voice steady. If this marriage is over, Danielle, then let's make it official. I'll file for divorce first thing tomorrow. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by my calm response. Fine, she said, though her voice wavered. Do whatever you want. Oh, I will, I said, grabbing the laptop and my phone. And while I'm at it, I'll make sure Brandon knows exactly what kind of person he's getting involved with. Her face twisted with panic. Ethan, don't you dare drag him into this. I smirked, the tables turning in my favor. Why not? He seems to have no problem dragging himself into my marriage. He deserves to know the full picture. Danielle stepped closer, her hands trembling. Look, Ethan, I didn't mean for things to get this far. We can talk about this, figure something out. Her sudden change in tone almost made me laugh. Oh, now you want to talk? You didn't seem so interested in working things out when you were sneaking off to hotels. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. Save it, Danielle. I'm done. You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. I walked out of the room, her stunned silence following me. I spent the rest of the night gathering everything I needed, emails, text logs, financial records. By the time I was done, I had a mountain of evidence that painted a crystal-clear picture of her betrayal. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. I laid everything out for him, sparing no detail. He assured me that with the evidence I had, I'd have the upper hand in court. Danielle wouldn't just lose my trust. She'd lose everything she thought she'd get away with. When I returned home that evening, Danielle was waiting for me, her face pale and drawn. We need to talk, she said quietly. I crossed my arms. About what? The divorce? Or how you're going to explain this to everyone we know? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. She had made her bed. Now she could lie in it. Ethan, please, she said, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, but I never meant to hurt you like this. I laughed bitterly. You didn't mean to hurt me? Danielle, you tore our life apart for some cheap thrill. Don't insult me by pretending you care now. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. It's too late, Danielle. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Over the next few weeks, the divorce proceedings moved quickly. Danielle tried to fight back, but the evidence I had left her with little ground to stand on. Her lies unraveled in front of everyone. Our friends, our families, even her precious Brandon. And when it was all said and done, I walked away with my dignity intact, ready to rebuild my life on my own terms. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. The house is quieter now, but it feels peaceful for the first time in years. I've started focusing on myself, reconnecting with old friends, pursuing hobbies I'd let fall by the wayside, and even going on a few dates. As for Danielle, I've heard she's still with Brandon, but their relationship is anything but perfect. The cracks are already showing, and I can't say I'm surprised. Looking back, I realized something important. Her betrayal didn't define me. It was a painful chapter, but it wasn't the whole story. And now, I'm writing the next one where I finally come first. The past is behind me, and the future is wide open. And for the first time in a long time, I'm ready for whatever comes next.